Hello everyone, before this video starts, I would appreciate if you guys would leave a like and subscribe, since your support means the world to me and allows me to make these types of videos. Now let's get into the video. It makes sense when you think about it. The quiet kids, the queer kids, the nerds and the geeks and the loners. When everyone else is out at bars and clubs until 2 in the morning, sloppy drunk and shoving their tongues against each other's uvulas in front of God and his brother, where are they supposed to go? All the calm, hushed corners of the world are inaccessible after around 8 o'clock. No cafes to tuck into to sip on something sweet while clacking away at a keyboard. No bookstores with their worn, welcoming armchairs looking to beckon in the weary. No libraries, except Matt's. Matt Nelson, my boss, is the director of the night library, for lack of a better term. Does he possess the credentials to occupy the position of a library director? Let's just say if tearing through a pack of cigarettes and a pot of coffee in an hour were the top qualifiers, there'd be no better man for the job. But the night library doesn't have a board of trustees to answer to, which means Matt's GED may as well be a master's. It isn't a public establishment. Nobody's paying for its existence with their tax dollars, and the books don't come straight off the press from the publishing house. Ink still wet, pages still hot. I like to think of it as the half-price books of the library world. Our collection is made up of any and everything anyone is willing to contribute, which leaves us with a total sitting somewhere around a cool 1,000 items. It's a good thing, too, because we wouldn't have enough of a staff to manage it all otherwise. In all, there are 7 of us, or 8 if you count Doug, but no one's entirely sure he exists. Alice is our cataloger and Matt's very first employee. When he set out to open the night library's doors, he knew he would need a way to keep track of his inventory, and he only trusted himself to do so with the number of books he could count on both hands. The way he tells it, Alice laughed in his face when he propositioned her. She was working the streets at the time, and when he pulled up to her corner in his '97 Ford Ranger, cranking the window down at a geriatric snail's pace to ask if she was interested in alternative employment, she told him whatever he was paying in a week couldn't hold a candle to what she made in an evening. He handed her his card, which was actually the business card for a local nail salon covered in whiteout and scribbled over with a Sharpie marker, and told her to give him a call if she changed her mind. To this day, she won't tell him why, but when his phone rang smack in the middle of the night less than a week later, it was Alice on the other end. What in God's green hell would anybody want with a library open dusk to dawn? She asked him, once he'd elaborated on the position he was offering. Just let me know, he told her. She was outside the door 20 minutes later. After Alice came Della. She wandered inside one night in the dead of winter, fingertips purple and eyelashes weighted down with ice. Matt was mopping melted snow out of the entryway, and she stopped in front of him, blocking his path. "Can I help you?" he asked. No response. He took a moment to size her up, gauging the situation, and tried again. "Are you looking for work?" She snatched the mop straight out of his hand. She's never spoken a word to any of us, but not a speck of dust falls on a single surface before she catches it midair. We aren't sure if Della is even really her name. Matt just caught her writing it on the bathroom wall with foam cleaner one night, and when he asked, there was no objection. Horace was next. He'd been a regular patron of the library for quite some time before Matt took notice of the way he meticulously studied the shelves, halting any time he spotted a misplaced item to correct it before moving on. Matt stopped him as he was straightening a row of outdated medical texts and said if he was going to volunteer his time, he might as well get paid. Jenny followed not too long after, and she was certainly the most forthright of the crew. She marched directly up to the desk just before closing time and said to Matt, "Don't you have a life outside of this place?" Matt says now that he supposes he should have taken offense, but seeing as how he did not, in fact, have a life outside of the library, he didn't. "No," he told her plainly. "Why?" "Because." Apparently Jenny popped her gum here, which invited Matt to consider banning gum from the premises entirely. Then he thought, given that he'd never banned anything from the premises, gum seemed like the wrong place to start. "You're here like every night? Don't you want some time off? I could run the desk for you. It doesn't look very hard." "Okay," Matt said. He gave her a crash course of the circulation system, which isn't a real circulation system at all, One of his tech acquaintances built the program, and it runs exactly as well as we need it to with no room to spare. Tossed her the keys and headed home. Wiley would be the token charity case, except that they bust their ass harder than the rest of us put together for this place. The first couple of times they came around, they covered one of their eyes with their bangs and hung out in the library's dismal excuse for a teen area from sundown to sunup, never lingering quite long enough to be told that they had to leave before Matt locked up, but certainly cutting it close. While Matt was standing on a ladder one night trying to stuff enough paper towels around a faulty sprinkler head to keep it from saturating a ceiling tile, Wiley nearly scared him to his death coming up behind him without a sound. "I want to make a deal with you," they said. Once Matt had recovered from his miniature heart attack and regained his balance, he peered down the ladder to find Wiley staring up at him, face fully bared to him for the first time, right eye bloodshot and swollen with a bruise so dark it resembled a pit just beginning to yellow around the edges. "All right," he agreed, not bothering to ask what the deal might entail. As it turned out, Wiley's bargain was this: anonymity in exchange for labor. "No one can know where I am," Wiley explained. "I can't give you my legal name or an ID or my social, but I'll work hard and I'll do it for free if I can stay here. I won't run up the water or the electric. I won't turn any lights on or even use the bathroom during the day. It'll be like the building is empty the whole time it's closed, I swear. I just need somewhere to lock myself in." Matt's only conditions were that Wiley A, accept a paycheck, and B, keep their arrangement quiet, as he didn't need everyone in a rough spot to come to him expecting that they could strike the same deal. Wiley said, "I have no one to tell," and then asked where Matt kept his tools. If we've ever had a leak since, or a blown bulb, or a fried computer monitor, it hasn't lasted long enough for Matt to call a repairman before Wiley's had it fixed. As for me, it was sort of a fluke that I was hired at all. I don't sleep much during the night. In fact, I've only ever had one day shift job, and my body's internal alarm clock wasn't a fan of that arrangement. I was working overnights at a nursing home before the library, and I happened to pass by on a night off after a walk, too antsy to sit alone in my apartment. I'd never noticed it before, which isn't unusual for me, as I pride myself in my attention span's ability to give goldfish a run for their money. But the dim glow emanating from inside among the sea of darkened storefronts stood out like a beacon. My first impression, based on the interior of the building, was that it had likely been a laundromat in a past life, with its paltry concrete floors and low-tiled ceilings. The short, sparse shelves lined along the entryway for new books and special displays, I now know, led me in a natural progression to the circulation desk, where Matt had his face buried in his hands, and Jenny was holding open a book next to him that had cracked fully down the spine, loose pages lying haphazardly across the countertop. "Can't afford to replace shit all the time," Matt was saying, muffled by his palms. "Whatever. If it's too bad to glue it, I don't know, throw it away, I guess." I'm not sure what possessed me to do so, but I took a step forward, fingering the edge of the front cover. "I can fix it," I said, and then, as though such a vague explanation would make the situation less awkward somehow, "I do that. Fix books." Matt's head raised slowly, as though someone had attached it to a string. "Got a whole tower in the back. Can you fix all of them?" "I mean, I'd have to look at them first," I told him. "I've never done it on, a professional level. But my grandpa had some book presses he left me when I was in high school, so I've been doing it as a hobby for 10 years, give or take." Matt seemed to mull this over for a moment. "Most of what we've got's not anything special, but there are a couple of collector's items here and there. Signed copies, first editions, stuff like that. Can't find them damn near anywhere, and if you do, people want a pretty penny for them. What's your name?" "Adam." Matt stuck his hand across the desk. "Welcome aboard, Adam. When can you start?" That was about 3 years ago, which doesn't sound like a ton of time, granted. But there are some things around here you have to get used to so quick that by 3 months in, you start to feel like a seasoned vet. Every place has its odd little ins and outs, of course. We've got plenty. The back door next to the dumpster sticks from the outside, so we have to prop it open to take the trash out unless we want to walk around to the front. One of the bathroom lights is finicky, When the switch is flipped, they all shut off but the very center panel, and it takes a few tries to make it cooperate. Our power gets knocked out so easily in storms that we've got about a metric fuck-ton of battery-operated fans to keep cool, and a whole manual checkout system for when the computers are down. But as inconvenient as these little quirks can be at times, they're things we're all more than happy to deal with day to day. Matt's a good boss. He takes care of us with what little means he has. We don't get benefits, but he pays us for a full week of sick days each fiscal year. And we get paid holidays off. If we have something going on that we need to miss for, he never says no. We essentially set our own schedules, and there's no minimum to the number of hours we can work, so long as we're cool with the cut on our checks. The break room stays stocked with generic snacks and off-brand sodas, and as long as we're not tending to a patron, he genuinely couldn't care less whether we're on our phones or listening to music, as long as our work is done. We don't have a dress code, no staff meetings, no 8-hour trainings. I won't be a millionaire anytime soon, but the pay is good. Better than I expected. When Matt told me at the beginning of my interview, which was actually just me filling out paperwork, what the pay rate was, I couldn't help raising a brow. I don't have a degree, I informed him, in case somehow he'd confused me with someone whose life was far more put together. Or any experience in the field, technically. I know, he said. Just think of it as incentive. I hope it's enough to keep you around. I didn't understand at first what the hell that was supposed to mean. We're in a slightly rougher area of town, so I figured maybe we'd run into the occasional dispute or keyed-up addict. Then I finished my entry packet and flipped it over to find the last paper on the table, simply titled Staff Rules. It read as follows. 1. If you come across a man named Doug, tell him that of course you recognize him. Furthermore, ask why he's introducing himself as you've worked together since you were hired. He will laugh and ask your forgiveness for being so forgetful, at which point you should be clear to go about your day. However, if he happens to ask if you think he's doing all right at his job, be sure to tell him he's doing so well that if he ever left, we could never hire someone else to take his place. 2. There is no pool in the library, not in the basement, which does not exist, nor on the roof. If someone asks if you've been swimming in the pool yet, do not give a definitive answer. Simply say that you don't like to swim. Important, do not say you can't swim, just that you don't enjoy it. If you see a pool, exit the building and do not return until sunset the next evening. You're simply exhausted from working night shifts. 3. Do not bring peanuts or any peanut products into the building. Horace, our page, is allergic. 4. The second floor is only storage. Nothing is moving upstairs. If you think you hear anything unusual, that is scratching, stomping, humming, it's either the HVAC system or the pipes. 5. All of the keys that you need can be found on the key ring in the drawer below the time clock. If you come across a door that isn't labeled on the cheat sheet for the keys, you don't need to open it. It's likely just maintenance access. 6. Staff parking is in the upper lot. 7. When working in the children's area, do not be alarmed if books fall off the shelves from time to time. It's nearly imperceptible to the naked eye, but several of the shelves are built at a slight angle. 8. The coffee pot in the staff kitchen is free for everyone to use, and coffee supplies are located in the cabinet above the microwave. If you pick up the coffee pot and find that it is full of a dark, viscous substance, simply clean it out in the sink before using it. Just plug your nose while doing so. 9. We do not have gender-specific restrooms, and any protest in regards to such will not be tolerated. 10. If you see an elderly Hispanic woman dressed in morning garb crying quietly with her head down at the table in the back corner next to nonfiction, do not approach her. However, if she makes eye contact with you of her own accord, be sure to offer her your condolences. If she signals for you to come closer, tell her that you're sorry, but you have to get back to work. If she starts to stand, turn calmly away and begin walking at a brisk but unalarmed pace back toward the front of the building. Do not look behind you. Do not run. 11. On the last Saturday of each month, our custodian Della uses a specific cleaning solution to mop. The red coloration comes from the active ingredient, which is what protects the floors and keeps them from staining in the event of spills. It is not blood. 12. Please do not use Windex on the plexiglass windows of the meeting room. It streaks. 13. Keep an analog watch on your person at all times. If you ever feel that too little or too much time has passed since you entered the building, consult it rather than your phone or the clock on the computer. Whatever it says is correct. We look forward to working with you. Welcome to the Night Library. I've had several experiences worth recounting, to say the least. But the first story that comes to mind is in regards to Rule 2. So I thought I'd share that with you today. I'd been working at the Night Library for exactly 7 days, 4 shifts, but it was 1 week to the day since I'd been hired, and everything was going surprisingly smoothly. As any sane person would do, I had put the list of rules out of my mind, gathering that they were nothing more than a tactic to haze new employees. Assuming that I would have a leg up on them if I didn't acknowledge the list at all, I hadn't even mentioned it when I'd finished filling out my entry paperwork, simply slipped it into my locker and handed the rest in to Matt. Oh, I was asked about it, of course. Several times over the course of the following nights, various co-workers approached me to inquire as to whether anything had happened to me yet. When I asked what they meant, their response was always some variation of, "You know, the rules." And I would just snort and roll my eyes and be on my way. On the evening of my 4th shift, I had stepped away from the little hole in the back office that Matt had set up as a book mending station for me and was briefly helping Jenny out. We were unusually swamped at the desk and Matt had taken off for the night, so I figured she could use a little extra manpower. We'd worked our way almost entirely through the line, and when the face of the last patron finally surfaced from the crowd, Jenny was still busy with someone else, so naturally it was me they looked to. "Hi," I said. "What can we do for you?" That was when I noticed their eyes. There wasn't anything wrong with them. Not technically. They were dark, but not unnaturally so. Not bloodshot. The pupils weren't abnormally large, but there was something behind them that... No, let me try that again. There was nothing behind them. That was the problem. I looked away. "Pool," they said. I cleared my throat. "Sorry?" "Pool. Your pool. I need help finding it." I laughed and a cool air of relief washed over me. They looked soulless and creepy as hell on purpose, of course. Matt had put them up to this, or if not Matt, one of the other employees. "Sorry, buddy," I told them. "That's not going to work on me. Nice job, though. You kind of freaked me out for a second." The patron said nothing, just ever so slightly furrowed their brow and tilted their head to the side, as though they didn't understand what I was saying. "I need help finding your pool," they repeated. I leaned partway across the counter, lowering my voice so that Jenny wouldn't overhear. She seemed preoccupied enough, but you never quite know with her. "Look, dude, I don't want to spoil the fun for everyone else, so I'm going to let them think they're pulling one over on me for a while, okay? But I'm not buying it. I'll walk away from the desk with you, but once we're out of the line of sight, you can drop the act." This seemed to satisfy them well enough, because they turned and began heading opposite my direction. I quickly ducked out from behind the counter to follow. We walked in silence until we were safely hidden in the stacks, and then I stopped, reaching out to place a hand on their shoulder. "All right, pal, I think we've made it far enough." They faced me, and I waited for the facade to fall away. It didn't. "Your pool," they recited once more. Slowly, a quiet unease began to creep up my spine. I managed. "Where is it?" For a moment, I considered. There was absolutely no way in hell any of this rules bullshit was real. But why were they so dedicated? "Is Matt paying you to do this?" They stared blankly back at me, the same dead eyes as before, unblinking and cold. "Where?" they demanded icily. "Is your pool?" As little stock as I had put into the list, it had, in its absurdity, stuck with me in such a way that made it difficult not to recall near to every detail. "There is no pool in the library," I remembered reading, and then "not in the basement," which doesn't exist. "It's in the basement?" I tried, fearing that the next query would be where the basement was located. But no more questions came. Instead, the patron nodded and left me alone between Stephen King and Leanne Moriarty. I shouldn't have followed them. For countless reasons, I shouldn't have. But I needed to know what was going on. So I peeked around the edge of the shelf, ensuring that I'd given them enough leeway not to take notice of me trailing them, and then I set off. They were headed toward the children's area, which was entirely across the building from where we'd just been, and I was forced to keep my pace brisk so as not to lose sight of them. They bobbed and weaved in and out of my view, but I always managed to catch up just before it was too late. We traversed through the baskets of puzzles and blocks, along the dingy train mat thrown thoughtlessly across the largest expanse of open floor, and somewhere to my right, a read-along book that had been left open was stuck on a loop of animal sounds. We passed by the library's small collection of second-hand leapfrog learning pads and stepped over a spilled bin of well-worn stuffed animals, me keeping as quiet as I could all the while. Finally, we reached the rear wall, and I saw something I'd never noticed before. There was a door. Nothing about it was special or notable in the slightest. It was a metal rectangle that had been painted the same deep, flat shade of blue as the building's exterior doors, and it was fitted with an identical window so high up I would have needed a ladder to see what lay beyond. As was the only logical next event in our sequence, the patron approached it and turned the handle, which opened to them fluidly and without issue. Half of me hoped it would do the same when it was my turn. Half hoped it wouldn't. The door wasn't loud. I wasn't particularly concerned that they'd hear me breach it once it had fallen closed behind them. But just to be safe, I counted off 10 Mississippis before easing it open and slipping inside. Immediately, I was immersed in darkness. It would have been total had it not been for the dim glow permeating through from the bottom of the set of descending steps before me. My brain, scrambling to compute, insisted that the lack of a basement in the building must have been part of the elaborate ploy. The fact that I'd never noticed the door didn't mean it didn't exist. Clearly it did, as I'd just used it. I'd only been here a week. It wasn't like I'd had a chance to explore every cubic inch of the place. Taking a steadying breath, I mentally chastised myself for being so gullible and started down the stairs. It took longer than I felt it should to reach the end. Far longer. But I chalked it up to anticipation and kept on until I reached a level concrete platform. The only turn to make was a right one, so I took it, drawing steadily closer to the disembodied light source. I traveled down a narrow corridor, minding my step, once I realized that the floor was covered in about 1/8 of an inch of water, just enough to result in a soft, echoing splash if I swung my foot down with enough force. I didn't hear anything ahead of me, but the patron hadn't preceded me by much. They had to be fairly close. Soon the hallway opened into what I understood to be the basement. Beams and pipes littered the ceiling in an impossible maze, and I found that the light I'd been following was produced by a single, low-wattage bulb suspended from the rafters by a wire. I could see the center of the room clearly, but the edges blurred back into shadow. Straight ahead, I thought something shifted, but I couldn't be sure. Considering that I was out in the open now with nowhere to hide, I called out a reluctant, "Hello?" No direct response came, but there was a quiet skittering from the same area where I thought I'd seen motion, so I moved toward it against my better judgment, squinting in attempt to make out a shape of any form. When I finally settled on one, it was the yawning black mouth of an entryway. Almost blindly, I felt my way forward and stuck my hand inside to be met with empty air. The basement was cooler than upstairs already, but as I stepped fully through, I estimated the temperature drop to be another 5 degrees at the very least. The water that had veiled the floor from the bottom of the stairs had never receded, but it grew a hair deeper here, just enough so that it began lapping at the canvas above the soles of my shoes. "Hello?" I asked again. Too unsure of my surroundings to go any further, I stood my ground and listened intently. This time, I could swear I heard a faint splash. It's difficult to explain what happened next. It was as though a film of a sort lifted from the entirety of the premises, and with it, the darkness. Not like someone had flipped on a switch, more like opening a blackout curtain. That's when I realized that it was because something was emerging. From underwater. Before I go into detail about that, let me set the scene for you. As soon as my environment was illuminated, my heart gained sentience and decided there was no time like the present to explore the outside of my chest. I was the origin of freeze being tacked onto the old fight or flight adage. But once I'd thawed, I took a liberal, stumbling step backward. so close to the space my toes had just inhabited that I'd have been done for had I allowed myself so much as a readjustment. There was a pool, or rather a pit full of water, so dark and deep it appeared bottomless. Something about it affected my perception of the rest of the space. It was so all-encompassing that everything around it seemed to be pulling toward it as though it was the center of gravity, dizzying and cloying. Thankfully, however, my focus was instantaneously directed elsewhere. Have you seen an anglerfish? I assume you have, but if not, take a second to Google it. What had arisen from the depths of the pool/pond/liquid grave greatly resembled one in several respects, the most notable being the giant pulsating bulb protruding from the center of its head and dangling in such a way as to perfectly illuminate the second most notable feature, the teeth. The most prominent difference between the thing before me and a traditional anglerfish was the size. For example, a fully grown anglerfish generally reaches the length of a ruler, but has on rare occasion been known to scarcely outgrow a yardstick. A yardstick may have been a match for a single, dagger-like protrusion jutting like a stalagmite from this creature's jaw. I ran, slipping along the damp floor and barely catching myself on the walls several times before finally finding myself in the stairwell again. I began ascending it with all the force and swiftness in my being. They say the drive home always feels shorter, and this was apparently applicable to the trip up the stairs from the gate to hell versus down the stairs to it as well, because it felt as though not a second had passed before I was shoving the door open and collapsing onto the carpeted ground outside to catch my breath. When I got my bearings and stood, glancing quickly over my shoulder to be sure I hadn't inadvertently invited anything to accompany me out of the basement, I felt my stomach plummet. The door was gone. I looked insane by the time I made it back to the desk, and Jenny wasn't shy about telling me so. "What happened to you?" she asked. "Did somebody waterboard you, or is that sweat?" "I saw it," I told her. "The pool." She cocked one brow, eyes minutely widening. "Welcome to the club, noob. Get out of here. I'll see you tomorrow." I got out. Needless to say, I started studying that list like gospel the next night and never questioned it again. It's saved my ass a fair few times now, as it has everyone's here. And before you ask why I don't quit, why any of us doesn't, I have to admit that I don't have a solid answer for you. The money is definitely part of it. Matt knows what he's doing, buttering us up, giving us incentive not to seek out alternative employment. He keeps the staff small and cuts corners pretty much anywhere else he can so he's able to pay us what he does. But there's something else too, something too intangible to verbalize, and it's unspoken between the lot of us that the sensation is mutual. We're just supposed to be here. Besides, I don't know if the library would take too kindly to us leaving. In a place as unique as the Night Library, there are bound to occasionally be hazards to the general public. Our rules are only given to staff. We don't attach a copy to every patron registration form we hand out for a multitude of reasons. And I think I can speak for all of us when I say the most prominent of those is that we simply don't need to. Sure, there's the fact that no one would believe the rules in the first place, or that if they did, it would likely incite mass panic. But we haven't really come across either of those issues in a serious capacity because the rules generally seem to only regard our staff. Something about signing off on a job offer here commits us to the library in a way that means we're no longer blind to what's going on behind the curtain, so to speak. I've tried to ask Matt if he knows why that is on plenty of occasions, but he's pretty dodgy about it. So I've come to terms with the idea of never getting an answer. It's just the way things are. As long as our patrons aren't affected, the technicalities don't really matter. However, as with any rule, there are exceptions. The particular exception that brought about today's story is what I like to refer to as the revival clause. I learned about it in an innocent enough way. We have a regular patron named Doris, or Dory if you're familiar with her, which we all are, who Matt pointed out to me within my first few months of work. "See her?" he asked one night, tapping my shoulder with his knuckle to get my attention. And I was checking in a stack of books I just brought back to the desk from being mended, and I raised my head, following his line of sight to the front door, where a woman was entering in a wheelchair, an oxygen mask secured to her face. I nodded a confirmation. "Keep an eye on her," he told me. "If you see anything today, or if anybody does, So does she. She's a special case. Try to make sure nothing happens. I furrowed my brow, confused. What do you mean? Did she, used to work here or something? Matt shook his head, chewing on the inside of his cheek. No. She had a heart attack last year that, it killed her. Clinically. They were able to bring her back after a minute or so, but it changed something. I set my books down, turning to face Matt. Changed something how? We hadn't seen her in a few months. We knew something had to be wrong. Her health's always been bad, so we thought life had finally just given up on her. But then she came back, told us what had happened. We didn't think anything of it at first, and then one Saturday she was on her way out and started screaming. I ran up to the vestibule, and there was Della mopping the floors with, her cleaning solution? I supplied, confused. Yeah. Matt cleared his throat. So when Dory went into hysterics about all that blood, I knew something wasn't right. I blinked. Wait a minute. Are you saying it doesn't look like that to everyone? I thought that was one of the normal rules, like the Windex thing or the parking lot. Does that mean it is blood? Is it blood, Matt? For a moment, Matt was quiet. I guess you were gonna find out eventually, he said, voice gruff. I could feel that my eyes were wide, but I wasn't quite sure how to remind them that they didn't operate on a hand crank. Where the hell does it come from? I stage whispered, and then when a second, arguably more horrific thought came to mind. Why is she mopping our floors with it? Matt waved a hand dismissively. Not issues you need to concern yourself with. I'm gonna step out for a smoke. Just watch her. Now, when I said my introduction to the revival clause was innocent, I meant that it consisted of nothing more than a conversation. I was mildly traumatized, sure, but nothing happened to Dory that day as a result of it. However, that doesn't mean it's never caused anyone harm. Last year, as I was in the back reattaching a book's hinge, Wiley knocked on the doorframe of my office, for lack of a better term. Hey, they said, just wanted to give you a heads up that La Mujer de Luto is here, so stay out of nonfic tonight. I wiped the binding glue off my fingers onto a cloth and swiveled my chair around. Sounds good. Everybody okay? Yeah, Hugo already left for the night, so I think it's just me, you, and Matt here. I'm working on installing some new barcode scanners, and then I'm heading out too. Cool, I said. Thanks for letting me know. They offered me a two-fingered salute as they departed. I'd seen her before, the morning woman. The situation had only ever progressed as far as offering my sympathy. She'd never beckoned me over to her or tried to follow me, so aside from feeling slightly on edge, I wasn't greatly impeded upon by Wiley's warning. I simply hollered over my shoulder for Matt to let me know if he needed help on Cirque and kept working. Hours passed. Several. So many that I'd mostly forgotten to be on alert by the time I made my way out of my cave and set off into the stacks. Still just aware enough not to venture into nonfiction. I was shelving some Douglas Adams books I'd just finished repairing. I've seriously debated trying to contact Macmillan to ask if they can please find some way to carry out their personal vendetta against the guy besides binding every one of his novels like dog shit. And I distinctly felt eyes boring into the back of my head. When I spun around to discover who they belonged to, I was met with a girl. I instantly recognized her, although I didn't know her by name. She frequented the library during the week and had mentioned to me before that she liked to come in after she got off work at the hospital to decompress. Oh, hey, I didn't hear you come up behind me, I told her. What can I do for you? She took a step toward me. The motion was jerky as though she was reluctant, and it encouraged her thick, pen-straight hair to envelop her brown shoulders like a curtain. She mumbled something, too low for me to hear. I'm sorry, I said. I didn't catch that. Hey. One of her arms gripped the other, and it looked like she was trying to hold herself still. Again, she mumbled something unintelligible under her breath. Are you all right? I asked. This time when she spoke, I heard her. Uno para la tristeza. Unease began a slow creep over me. I don't speak Spanish, I said. This had never come up in conversation between us before, given that she'd never spoken Spanish to me, but I attempted to hold on to hope that she had some reason, unbeknownst to me, to believe that I might. Uno para la tristeza, she repeated. Dos para la alegría. Are you counting something? It was true that I didn't speak Spanish, but I'd taken a couple of semesters of it in high school and paid enough attention to pick up on the most basic words and phrases. But 1 for and 2 for what? At the speed of 02 dial-up, my brain allowed a memory to filter through. Tristeza, my freshman Spanish teacher had said, contorting his mouth into an overly dramatic frown. My little trick for remembering this word is that it sounds like trist, which is something people are often sad to find that their partners are having behind their backs. Tristeza, sadness, sorrow. Uno para la tristeza, 1 for sorrow. On autopilot, though I hadn't heard it in probably 2 decades, my mind filled in the next line of the old Magpie nursery rhyme. 2 for joy. The girl stood before me, trembling, waiting. 3 for a girl, I continued aloud, though every fiber of my being was sounding alarms against my doing so. Desperately, she reached out to me. 4 para un niño, she recited. I took her hand in both of mine. 5 for silver. 6 para el oro. 7 for a secret, I finished, never to be told. Do you know my secret, Adam? Instantly, I went cold. But I did know. I did. You've died before, I guessed. Haven't you? The girl slumped, an expression of relieved surrender overtaking her. Her eyes began to well with blood. No. I held fast to her wrist. No, stay with me. Do not move, okay? Don't move, Matt. I have to go now, she said. I have to go with her. Matt! It was too late. Before Matt would have had so much as a chance to intervene, the mourning woman was there, blocking the exit directly next to us at the end of the row. The veil that typically shrouded her face consisted of thin, loose-knit lace which only clearly exposed her eyes. But it was lifted now, and her cheeks were streaked with dried, brown-red trails, lashes matted and heavy. Necrosis had eaten holes through her lips, and her long, yellowed teeth peeked through in several places, spittle stringing between them as her swollen tongue parted them to speak. Vienes, she rasped, raising one gnarled, crooked finger to the girl's chest. The girl strained against my grip, releasing a shuddering sob. Come on, I said, tugging desperately at her arm. This way. She didn't budge. It was as though her feet were cemented to the floor. It's okay, she told me. Let go. I refused, clamping down even tighter. La Mujer de Luto glided toward me, and I sucked a breath in, squeezing my eyelids shut and stifling a gag at the scent of her putrid flesh. The last thing I felt before losing consciousness was the brush of her ice-cold, ragged nails against my forehead. When I came to, I was lying on the floor in the break room. Matt was standing at the counter pouring coffee into his signature mug. World's best grandma, he found it in a cabinet when he bought the building. And when he saw that I was awake, he held it up to me in a cheers motion. Hey, slugger, he said. How you feeling? I pushed myself up onto my elbows and assessed. My head was pounding, my mouth incredibly dry, but otherwise I wasn't much worse for wear. Okay, I answered. Okay, he echoed. Gonna quit on me? I blew a huff of laughter out my nose. Nah, I don't think so. Good, then go home. I'll see you tomorrow night. Over the following weeks, missing posters began cropping up around town. They depicted the girl from the library, of course. Her name was Mina Alcalde. She was a 23-year-old medical student at the local university. Her parents' contact information was listed below her photograph, as well as a sizable reward for her safe return. Every time I saw one, my stomach flipped. I debated calling them on several occasions, just to try and offer them some kind of closure. But what could I have said? Stop looking for your daughter. She's been taken by what I'd guess is probably the spirit of a dead woman to God knows where, and she's never coming back. So I never did. The months passed, and eventually the posters became fewer and further between. But I never forgot her face. To this day, damn near every time I close my eyes, I see hers glazing over with blood. I hear her silently pleading with me both to help her and to set her free. I try to tell myself it wasn't my fault, that these things are never in our control. But on the worst nights, when I can't sleep without her watery voice resonating throughout my entire head, begging me to let the mourning woman take her. I wonder if there was something more I could have done. I wonder if I could have saved her. As unbelievable as it sounds, it was literally a dark and stormy night, and also a Friday the 13th, in October, under a full moon. Nah, I'm just kidding. It really was storming though, but it was late spring, and the rain was nice and light, and even a little unseasonably warm. Kind of made for the perfect cozy library aesthetic atmosphere if you're into that sort of thing. I was pretty well caught up on the books that needed repairing for the moment, so our cataloger Alice had asked me if I had time to pull a list of materials for her that she'd accidentally only saved brief records for. Nothing out of the ordinary had gone on so far during the evening. It had been quiet mostly. We'd signed up a couple of new patrons, which by the way, you can do online now since it's been so highly requested. Here's the link. And helped an elderly couple print out some shipping labels earlier in the shift. But basically, everyone had cleared out by midnight. I was pulling from near the section Horace was shelving in, and we were making idle conversation, by which I mean I was talking at him, and he was grunting in response. But in the midst of a sentence, I stopped. Above us, something had cut me off. Thump! Screech! Thump! What the? Horace, did you hear that? Hear what? Horace asked absently, eyes still locked mechanically on the task before him. Upstairs, I insisted. I swear to God, something just... Thump! Screech! Thump! That! You had to hear that. Slowly, Horace looked up at me. I'd never seen an expression on his face quite like the one he wore in that moment. It conveyed a litany of emotions ranging from fear to frustration to desperation, and he shook his head in a singular, pointed motion. No, he said. No, I didn't hear anything. Neither did you, and if you did, it's just the ducks. But... No, Adam, he pleaded. There's nothing up there, you know that. Just ignore it. Okay, I conceded. Sorry, you're right, I know. The sound didn't stop for at least half an hour. If anything, it grew louder and more persistent, though that may have just been my brain's progressive inability to block it out. But I did my best, and eventually it did cease. Once we'd had 10 or so minutes of consistent quiet, Horace's giant shoulders visibly relaxed. Do you have anything coming out of repair that needs to be shelved? He asked me. No, I said. You've gotten them all, I think. Then I'm going home. I'll see you tomorrow. See you then, I agreed. He left. Once I'd finished pulling Alice's books, there were a lot. I probably looked like a grandfather, the way I had to inch the cart across the floor. I took them back to her desk, playfully bumping into the back of her wheelchair with the truck. I'm filing for workers' comp, she threatened, not bothering to turn around. Thanks, nerd. Any time, I told her, except when I have something better to do. She still didn't turn, just leaned her head back so far it looked like she was being exorcised. Did you hear the, ruckus? She asked, gesturing with a glance to the ceiling. Up there? There was a step stool tucked behind the filing cabinet next to me, and I pulled it out, sitting down atop it and scooting it closer to her. Okay, yes, I whispered, although to my knowledge there was no one else in the back office. But Horace wouldn't talk about it, which I know is a rule, that there's nothing upstairs or whatever, but there obviously is, Alice finished. Yeah, sounded pretty fucky, whatever it was. Have you ever been up there, I asked. Nah. Alice righted herself, pushing off one side of her desk and then the other to swivel her chair back and forth. This bad boy can climb a set of stairs like a champ, but it's not too quick on the uptake, and I'm not willing to gamble on how fast I could make it back down if something was after me. Besides, personal code of conduct is to leave well enough alone in this place. Maybe that's why it's easier for me to talk about it all. 'Cause I'm just guessing at what's going on. Wait, all of it? You've never seen anything? Not nothing, Alice clarified. But not much. I've never seen the pool or gone upstairs or tried to figure out any of the mystery keys that just appear on the ring sometimes. Nothing avoidable. I've been here a long time, almost as long as Matt. He's done a lot to protect me. I mean, he does whatever he can to keep us all safe, obviously. But when I started here, it was just the two of us, and there was a lot he was still figuring out, which meant it was especially dangerous. If some new weird shit came up, Matt explored it. alone. A lot of times that meant he got hurt, but I never did, and that was 100% thanks to him. So it would just kind of feel like slapping him in the face not to take any precaution he offered me, if that makes sense. Yeah, I said. Yeah, that makes sense. Thump. Screech. Thump. The sound emanated from above us once again, but this time it was immediately followed by something else. A paralyzing, gut-wrenching scream. I jumped. Alice did too, hand to her chest. Jesus, H, she breathed. Where's Matt? Is he still here? I don't know, I managed. I think so, somewhere. Is it not something you've ever heard before? No, Alice admitted, leaning down to unlock her chair's brake. I'm gonna go look for him. You just don't do anything stupid. Now, I'm not sure if you've gathered yet from the first couple entries of this series, but telling me not to do anything stupid is kind of like taking a salt shaker to a slug and telling it not to die. In my defense, I'm almost never just charging straight at something I know might get me maimed or killed without a decent enough reason that I deem the odds acceptable. And in this situation, I genuinely did intend to keep myself planted firmly on the step stool and wait for Alice to return, hopefully with Matt in tow. But then the sound came again, and following it, another scream. This one broke off into a sob, and directly afterward, the first audible words. Help! Can anyone hear me? Please, help me! I froze and listened, and waited. Thump. Screech. Thump. Please, God, please. Somebody help me. It's... Screech. Silence. Quieter than dead air. The absence of sound. My own breathing, quick and shallow, was the only noise that existed. There was no electricity humming, no air flowing through the vents. Absolutely nothing. That somehow was worse than the screaming. It was an infinitely less alive sound, which made it infinitely more chilling, and I physically could not sit idly with it in anticipation. So I got up. Should it have been to look for Alice and Matt? Probably yes, but there's something about a certain level of adrenaline that impairs logic and reason. So what did I do? You guessed it, I'd been in our mechanical room plenty of times before. That's where we store donated books until Alice can get to them to catalog them, and it's also where Della keeps her cleaning supplies, which we all need access to from time to time. But I'd never gone up the stairs. First time for everything is what I figured. I wasn't sure if I wanted to make my presence known or not, so I kept my mouth shut, tiptoeing up each step and making sure not to scuff my shoes along the grip on the edges. It felt like it took ages to reach the top, as cautious as I was being. But I got there eventually, and when I did, I didn't see anything. I mean, I could see. The lights were on, if dim. Some of them looked as though they meant to be fluorescing, but had burned out at some point in the likely distant past. But nothing appeared to be amiss. There were totes and boxes stacked precariously atop one another in the center of the floor, and to the sides were all the HVAC machines, their green sensors tinting the room in a strange hue. Tentatively, I made a lap around the perimeter. Nothing stirred. Nothing made a peep. I knew rationally that I should cut my losses, or my wins depending on how you look at it, and get back to the safety of the office before anything had a chance to rear its ugly head. But I also knew what I'd heard, and I wasn't about to be gaslit by whatever had lured me up there in the first place. There was nowhere to hide on the outskirts, but I sized up the mound of miscellaneous objects in the middle of the floor. There could be something under the boxes. In them, maybe. I walked slowly over, taking a breath to steel myself, and toed the outer edge of the pyramid, jumping reflexively back in anticipation. But I didn't need to, it seemed. I apparently hadn't upset the balance. The mound remained intact and undisturbed. Feeling slightly braver, I stepped forward and kicked it again, this time with enough force to rattle it all the way to the top, but not so much as to knock anything over. Still, once it had settled, nothing emerged. Something did, however, fall from the fucking ceiling. If you've ever seen a horror movie where the big bad creepy crawly is lurking above the protagonist's head and wished you could scream at them to just look up already, rest assured that I have too. You probably tell yourself that you'd never be so oblivious or unobservant, that you would check every inch of your surroundings, overhead included and possibly prioritized. I know because I always told myself the same. The thing is, in real life scenarios, you just don't anticipate an animatronic velociraptor pterodactyl hybrid swooping down and entrapping you in its enormous goo-covered wings. Reading that back, it sounds kind of hilarious. So for the sake of the atmosphere, just understand that it absolutely was not. I'd barely caught a glimpse of it before I was completely enveloped in warm, sticky blackness. But what little I had seen was nearly enough to send me straight out of consciousness. I knew if I was going to, you know, not pass out, I needed to slow my breathing, stop thrashing fruitlessly around, and gather whatever information I possibly could from my current position. Its grip on me was tight, but not so much so that I felt suffocated, which gave me a glimmer of hope that perhaps whatever it was, it didn't plan to constrict me to death. I was crushed against its body, which my cheek registered as hot metal of some sort. But when I wiggled my fingertips against what I could reach of its wings, they felt leathery and soft, almost like a tanned cow's hide. Quickly, I learned the source of the thumping and screeching that had given the thing away. Every step it took, jostling me from side to side, resulted in a resounding thud, and between each footfall, its tail scraped tinnily across the concrete floor. I wanted to cover my ears, but my arms were pinned to my sides, so I settled for gritting my teeth instead. We made several passes back and forth from one end of the room to the other, and I realized at some point that it was beginning to grow agitated. It was huffing great breaths out its nose, stomping harder and harder, swinging its tail more and more frenetically. I was still far too shaken to use rational thought, no matter how hard I tried, but I did eventually come to surmise that it may have been angry it couldn't fly while holding me captive. So I did the only thing I could. I waited it out. I was, of course, desperately wondering where Matt was. Maybe he'd left without telling us, I reckoned, and Alice hadn't been able to find him after all. Maybe she'd tried to call him, and he hadn't answered, so she'd had no choice but to leave me to my own devices. She certainly shouldn't risk coming to look for me alone if there was a chance she wouldn't be able to get away quickly enough to save herself. The mechanical dinosaur bird dragged me over the length of the space for what could have been minutes or hours or days for all I knew. And by the time it finally slowed to a stop, I felt delirious. The wet, sloughing sound its wings made as it unwound them from around my body made my stomach turn. And just as I tried to remind myself to be grateful that at least the slime coating me from head to toe was odorless, the thing opened its mouth. The stench that emanated from it was unlike anything I had, or have to this day honestly, ever experienced. It was worse than death, worse than rot, worse than decay, worse than a combination of every disgusting aroma I'd ever been subjected to at once. It knocked me flat on my ass, which turned out to be a damn shame for me, because once I'd landed, I couldn't unglue myself from the floor. I was forced to take in its full form now, and my brain refused to process any of what it was seeing, catapulting me instantly into a state of derealization. It had to be at least 7 feet tall, with a wingspan twice as long, and I could see clearly that the bronze making up its abdomen, head, and legs had begun to oxidize, giving the effect of flaking skin. Its wings resembled bats' wings, and as it stretched them, each individual vein they contained was exposed by the light behind them. It was just going to eat me right there. I was fairly sure of that now, even as badly as it had clearly wanted to savor me on the ceiling instead, for which there was a reason, but that's, well, another story for another time. It craned its long neck down, reminiscent of that of a large desk lamp's, and stopped short only inches from my face. Its mouth was still open, but what I saw inside gave me pause. It was another beak. This one was smaller, but it was behind the creature's jagged teeth, in the place where I would have expected to see a uvula in a human. Slowly it began to creak open as well. Past its exterior, I could barely make out what looked to be a small, round speaker, the type that might have been found in an old-school intercom system. To my horror, it began to crackle to life. "Help!" it pleaded, deafeningly loud. "Can anyone hear me?" I felt my blood turn to ice as it began to scream, and scream, and scream. It was taunting me. That was all there was to it. It was solidifying what I'd really already known. There had never been a person in danger. It had cast its hook, and I'd taken the bait. Its viscous, stringy saliva dripped onto my head and shoulders, and I was entirely powerless to stop it, no matter how hard I fought to move. I clamped my teeth together, forcing back wave after wave of nausea. I'd always expected that, if I was of sound enough mind to be aware at my time of death, I would have at least one profound thought. But in that moment, nothing but pure, white panic filled my mind. I was terrified, simply and truly. There was no room for anything else. A thin, black tongue rolled out of its mouth, the texture similar to a cat's, with sharp, angled barbs pointing toward its throat. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't bring myself to. Couldn't even close my eyes. I needed to fully experience the last moments of my life, whatever they might entail. I instinctually believed, when I first heard the pop, that the creature's head had exploded of its own volition. I couldn't quite see what was going on, as I was too busy blinking blood, at least that's what I assume it was, out of my eyes. But then there was silence save for the sound of wires short-circuiting, and then Matt was speaking, as close to frantic as I'd ever heard him, yelling out imperatively that I respond if I could. My lips were covered in blood too, so I hummed in response, not willing to test what might happen if I were to accidentally ingest it. "Fuck," Matt said when he reached me, kneeling and pulling the sleeve of his shirt down over his hand to wipe off my mouth and eyes. "Are you hurt?" he asked, and then amended. "Bad?" I coughed, shaking my head. "No, I'm fine, just stuck. What did you do?" "Shot the bastard," he told me, unsheathing the knife hooked to his belt and beginning to work at the goo cementing me to the floor. "Sometimes the solution's easier than you expect." Once he'd cut me out of confinement, he helped me to my feet, giving me a good once-over to make sure I hadn't sustained any injuries I was in too much shock to feel yet. This was a particularly easy feat, given that if any of my own blood had been displaced, it would have been red, contrasting starkly with the muddied green of the monsters. "Thanks," I said. Thanks. "Don't come up here again," he told me. "The rules exist for a reason." "I know. I'm sorry. I just thought someone was in trouble." "If you ever think someone's in trouble, come find me. I'll handle it." We trudged back downstairs, my feet squelching every time they made contact with the ground. I didn't ask if Matt had a plan for the creature's body. I didn't ask if he'd known how to kill it because he'd run into one before. I didn't ask if I was fired. Back at the desk, Alice told me she wanted to punch me, but it wasn't worth getting that nasty shit all over her hand, which I thought was fair on both accounts. She also told me it had taken her a while to track Matt down. He'd been outside in the storage shed. And then reminded Matt that she had explicitly instructed me not to do anything stupid while she was gone, which I corroborated. If anyone was going to be in trouble, it had better be me. But I wasn't. Matt sent me home to clean myself up and get some rest, both of which I did. When I showed up for work the next night, it was as though nothing had ever happened. We never spoke of it. I fully intended after that night to heed Matt's warning to never set foot upstairs again. Truly, I did. And I did heed it until about a week ago. But I think I've given you enough to digest for now. And there's something to the belief that you shouldn't pry at a fresh cut. So maybe another time. It had been a bad night. We have those here, as you know. We're prone to bad nights, but this was a bad night. Wiley had accidentally unlocked a door trademark, Rule 5. I'd been incapacitated by the coffee pot, Rule 8, I'll elaborate on this one eventually, and we'd been hit with a midwinter blizzard that had knocked the power out cold. We had a generator running to do things like keep us from freezing to death while we were snowed into the building, and as I've mentioned before, we're so used to losing power that we've got a whole system for checking people in and out offline. But there's just something extra eerie about the place with nothing but the dingy emergency lights on. I'm not afraid of the dark, but I'm not a complete numbskull either. So I am afraid of the library when I ought to be. And that night was teeming with reasons. It was just the three of us, me, Wiley, and Matt, all huddled behind the circulation desk together. There weren't any patrons coming in because nobody could get out of their houses. And although there was plenty we technically could have kept busy with, we'd come to an unspoken agreement that splitting up would be B-movie stupid. So there was nothing left for us to do but wait it out and talk. Matt isn't a particularly conversational guy unless he's in the right mood to be, but I guess that night had been enough to bring it out of him. The borderline functional alcoholism, too. That's borderline alcoholism, not borderline functional. I'd never seen him drink on the job before, but there was no way we'd see a single other person before we made it out of there, so it didn't really matter. Also, his establishment, his business, above my pay grade to question. He wasn't drunk yet, but he'd been nursing a tumbler of bourbon for the better part of the night, and he was clearly a little less inhibited than usual. "This fucking place," he muttered, raising his glass to me in question. I shook my head. I don't drink, which Matt knows and knew then, but it was the only solace he had to offer in the moment. "Do you think it'll always be worth it?" I asked him. "Keeping it open?" Wiley tried to swipe Matt's glass while he wasn't watching, earning them a swat to the back of the head. I'm fairly sure they were of the legal drinking age, but Matt's always looked at them way too much like his kid to be cool with instilling any bad habits in them. "I don't know if it's ever been worth it," he admitted, "but it's my responsibility now." I stood from my seat, pushing myself up onto the desk so that I'd be fully facing him. "What do you mean now?" Matt hesitated. "Jesus, I need a smoke," he sighed. "It's complicated. This building can't just fall into anybody's lap. The man who owned it before me, he didn't run it as a library, but he did run it with the same understanding of it that we have today. Before I took it over, it was a dry cleaner's." "So close," I muttered under my breath. "What?" "Oh, nothing. I just thought it was probably a laundromat because, never mind. Go on." Matt went on. "His name was Jung Hiroski. He and his father migrated here from Osaka when he was in his teens, after his mother passed away, and his father bought it from a commercial real estate agency for next to nothing. There wasn't anything wrong with it fundamentally. No issues with the foundation, nothing electrical, nothing the inspectors could find. He knew it didn't make sense that they were selling it so cheap, but he just chalked it up to wanting it out of their hair. It wasn't being used for anything at the time, which meant it was easy enough to renovate, and the Hiroskis had run a dry cleaning service back in Japan, so they knew what they were doing. Made a decent living pretty quick. Everything was going smoothly at first. They were adjusting well, fitting into the community. Jung was in his sophomore year of high school, so unsurprisingly, there was some racist bullshit to be had. But for the most part, it was pretty smooth sailing. He made some friends, met a girl, graduated, married her. Matt paused, knocking back the last of his current drink and refilling his glass halfway. They started trying for kids about 5 years later, but it never took. They both had all the tests run, and the doctor said everything seemed to be in working order. My opinion, the universe was looking out for some poor sucker who would have inherited this place one day. "So wait, how did you end up with it?" Wiley asked. "How'd you even meet? You don't seem like the kind of guy who's ever had something dry cleaned." Matt lazily held up a hand, signaling that Wiley wait. "I'll get there," he said. Anyway, not only could they not get pregnant, but around that same time, Jung found out his father was sick. Cancer. It had spread to his lymph nodes before they'd caught it, and it was so aggressive that none of the oncologists they spoke to recommended that they even try treatment. They said it would just cause him more pain, put his body under more stress. Obviously, Jung and his wife put the idea of starting a family on the back burner. His father declined alarmingly quickly, and one evening he called Jung to his bedside for a talk. About the business, of all things. Jung tried to tell him it wasn't important, that he would handle all the technicalities himself when the time came. But his father was insistent. There were things Jung didn't know, he said. Things he had to be prepared for. Jung had spent his fair share of time in the shop, especially in the few years since he'd graduated high school, but not nearly to the capacity that his father had, and not ever alone. His father made sure of that. The largest difference between then and now is that their hours of operation were typical for a business. They were open during the day, 9 to 7 through the week, 9 to 5 on the weekends. Things are calmer during the day. Wiley can attest to that, yeah? "Oh yeah," Wiley agreed. "I mean, it's not like everything just stops, but It's a whole lot different. If you'd only ever been here during the day, you could totally write everything off as something innocent. Exactly, Matt concurred. So having never been inside past closing time, Jung didn't know to be wary. And the most dangerous thing you can do in this building is be oblivious to it. His father had to be sure that he was ready for what was to come. So Jung sat down at his father's bedside, and his father began to tell him a story, one that Jung eventually told me. It went like this. Once upon a time, there was an herbalist. She worked quietly and discreetly from her home for many years. But eventually, her clientele grew so large that she'd outgrown her small space and sought out a local landowner for an opportunity to lease a property from him. He had just one open, he told her, but she was welcome to it if she could pay the price. She was shocked. She'd expected protest, if not flat-out refusal. It was far past the age of true witch trials, but still, men didn't tend to take too kindly to women in medicine, not to mention ones who opened their own honest businesses to practice it. But he was wholly uninterested in her operations, as long as they brought him money each month. So she signed the contract on the spot, and that was it. The building was hers. A fair few years passed, and all went swimmingly. The woman never married, nor did she bear children, but she was successful and fruitful and a pillar of her community. She healed the sick, soothed the restless, and helped those on their way out of this life through to the other side. Until the unthinkable happened. Of course, health is fickle. There were plenty of occasions on which she was unable to cure an ailment, but this was different. One evening, a mother bustled into the apothecary, holding her son to her chest. He was wrapped in a blanket, and the herbalist expected to see an infant. But when his mother lay him down on the work table in the shop, she saw that he was a young boy, perhaps 5 or 6 years old. "What troubles him?" the herbalist asked, rushing to his side. "A fever," the boy's mother replied. "I've bathed him in ice, kept him from food, given him plenty of water. Nothing will bring it down. Please help him." "Of course," said the herbalist. "A bit of willow tincture and he should be good as new." The boy's mother gripped the herbalist's hand. "Thank you," she said. "I haven't much, but I'll pay what I can." The herbalist waved her off. "I won't hear of it," she insisted. "The work is payment enough." Once she had fetched the tincture, she turned the boy onto his back and wet his lips with a sponge to encourage them to part. He wasn't conscious, but his frail body complied, his tongue darting out to catch the moisture. "Very good," the herbalist encouraged, though she was sure the boy couldn't hear her. Swiftly, she unscrewed the tincture's dropper cap and squeezed the top to fill the syringe, lifting it to the boy's open mouth and releasing it at a gradual but steady pace. "Is that it?" his mother asked after a moment. "It is," the herbalist confirmed. "He should wake improved in a couple of hours. If his fever rises again, bring him back to me." The mother and son took their leave. They had only been gone less than an hour, however, when they returned, the mother frantic, the boy convulsing in her arms, and Matt shook himself out of the retelling, eyes downcast, and chugged down another few fingers of bourbon. "Well," he said, "you can probably gather the rest." Anyway, turned out the son was deathly allergic to salicin, which is the active ingredient in willow bark. Killed him as soon as it set in. "Shit," Wiley whispered, fists pressed to their mouth. "Yeah," Matt laughed humorlessly. "Shit." Now the woman, his mother, didn't seek persecution against the herbalist. She was devastated, obviously, but she knew no intentional harm had been done. "How?" I asked. "Why didn't she think her son had been poisoned or something?" "Because," Matt explained, "the herbalist took some of the tincture in front of her to prove that nothing in it was toxic, and when that still wasn't enough to completely convince her, she asked to take some herself. Apparently, she said at least she'd be with her boy if it killed her. But it didn't, of course, and as fucked up as she was about the whole thing, she wasn't willing to cast blame where it wasn't due. But it was a village, a small one, at that. Word traveled quickly, and soon there wasn't a person within earshot who didn't know the woman's son had died at the hands of the herbalist. So, of course, she was ostracized from the community as a whole. Which meant what? No income, Wiley guessed. Matt shook a finger at them pointedly. That's right, no income. Nobody was paying or trading for her tinctures or balms or teas anymore, and there was only so much she could forage, especially in winter. She was on her way to starving to death quick, and she'd made her peace with that fact. In her eyes, it was her penance. She knew she hadn't killed the kid on purpose, but she still believed she deserved her suffering for taking the life of an innocent. So she resigned herself to her fate. But then, as the herbalist slept, she dreamed. And in her dream, there was a figure, tall and lean and shadowy black. It approached her as she was in reality, lying on her side in her bed, and brushed a lock of her fragile hair away from her ear. "I am the scorekeeper," it rasped, hot breath tickling her neck. "I was called to pay you a visit. Do you wish to settle a debt?" The herbalist watched her own unmoving body from above, well aware that she wasn't awake, but wishing still that she could communicate somehow, because she did wish to settle a debt, and she thought that maybe it would help her make peace with her passing if she said so, even to a dream. When the scorekeeper spoke again, she was startled at its words. "Worry not. What do you mean to speak aloud? Speak instead within your soul. I will understand." The herbalist wasn't sure if she believed this, but then again it was a dream. Her dream. Why shouldn't it be able to read her thoughts? So she opened her heart to the scorekeeper, letting the torment and turmoil and anguish of the death of the child overtake her spirit so intensely she feared she may never reel it in. She agonized for the boy, for the unfairness of all the years she had inadvertently robbed him of, for the suffering she'd been entrusted to ease, for the hollow, empty life of his mother. She ached for what she had done, intentional or not. She felt as though whatever made her human, whatever made her her asterisk, might split in two. "Enough," the scorekeeper said finally. "I have what I need. My only question left for you is this. Are you willing to trade places with the boy?" The herbalist, had she been asked beforehand, may have said she would have expected herself to need a moment to think, at least one. But when she said yes, it was with such instantaneous and absolute certainty that she knew without a shadow of a doubt that she meant it. And evidently, so did the scorekeeper. "You will have from sunrise until sunset to assure that your deal isn't for naught," it told her, wrapping its icy fingers around her wrist. "The boy will need to be unburied if he isn't to suffocate when the exchange is made." "Luck be with you." The herbalist woke. Dead, frostbitten tissue encircled her arm. She knew what she had to do. "Wait," I interrupted. "So it was real? Did she literally go dig this kid up?" Matt polished off his glass again. "Yeah," he said. "He just barely started decomposing, thankfully, still totally intact. So she dug him out, wrote a letter to his mom detailing everything that had happened, took him home in a wagon and left it outside the door. When she went to sleep that night, she didn't wake up." "But he did," Wiley guessed. "Bingo." Damn. A particularly strong gust of frigid wind howled past the windows, and I looked up to a confirmation that the snow didn't plan to ease anytime soon. Damn, I mean, this is like weird, even for here, even for us. A dead kid just coming back to life? I don't know, man. Matt shrugged his shoulders. Believe it or not, it happened. And the reason Jung's father told him the whole story was because it was about to happen again. See, he'd met the scorekeeper, and he was ready to make his own deal. He'd ended up eventually talking to the realtor who'd sold him the building, and he found out a thing or two about its prior tenants. Namely, nobody ever stayed. It took the right kind of person to put up with the goings-on here, and usually the people in commercial business weren't it. It had been sold to him for so little, he learned, because it had been vacant for so long that the company was about to cut their losses and have it bulldozed, historical value be damned. Of course, all the realtors in the agency had started spreading their own little ghost stories, but they didn't know anything. Not really. The scorekeeper, as it turned out, only showed itself to the people who were contractually responsible for the building and who it knew it could proposition with a deal. So when it approached Jung's father, it told him the story of the last deal it had made what felt like lifetimes ago. Well, showed him, more like. When the scorekeeper got close enough, it put its hand on his forehead and projected its exchange with the herbalist, almost like a movie into his mind's eye. That and everything that had followed. Once a certain kind of sacrifice has been made in any given spot, Something about it changes. The scorekeeper showed Jung's father the evolution of this place, the renovations and the partial demos and the reconstructions and all the nasty, nightmarish shit that's been drawn here since the first time somebody willingly gave their life inside. When it was over, he knew what his own deal would be and that he was going to take it, as long as his son complied with his ultimatum. What the scorekeeper offered him was a grandchild, one that he would never meet, his life in exchange for his son's ability to have a baby. He was dying already, but even if he hadn't been, he said he'd have taken it. All he asked in return was that Jung promised to get away, sell the building, leave the state, or hell, the country if he wanted to. Just go somewhere that the baby could never be exposed to this place. Jung still didn't believe it, still thought his dad was just on the brink of death and delusional. But he agreed just to humor the old man, and that was that. Until he spent his first and only night here alone. I don't know exactly what happened. What he saw, I didn't ask. But I know he was here later than he ever had been running reports, and after whatever happened, he never set foot inside again. The next week, his father passed. The week after that, his wife got a positive pregnancy test. He listed the building the same day, had all the equipment cleared out, locks changed, the whole nine. And I just happened to be the first unlucky fucker looking for a spot. Before he signed the title over to me, he asked me a bunch of weird-ass questions. If I had a family, if I ever planned to, if anybody was dependent on me, kept saying he didn't want to do this, that he wouldn't if he had any other choice. But he had to have the money. And then he told me everything. I thought he was off his rocker, of course, or just trying to fuck with me. I basically told him to stick it where the sun don't shine and gave him his check. Didn't take me long to realize I'd fucked up. He gave me his number when we met and told me to call if I had any questions, but warned me that the deal was final. I don't know what made me keep it, but I thank my lucky fucking stars every day that I did. He didn't have a lot of advice for me, seeing as how he hadn't actually experienced much of what went on firsthand, but at the very least he could assure me I wasn't on my last marble, and that was more comfort than I could have asked for at the time. He tried to talk me into just letting the place rot, but I knew I couldn't. Somebody would have come sniffing around eventually, and I'm not broke, but I'm not impervious to a high enough offer either, which I knew I'd get eventually if I just let it sit here. Believe it or not, I've got one or two morals, and they wouldn't let me pawn this bullshit off on anybody else. Jung's situation was different. If I'd been in his shoes, I would have done the same. He had a wife to look out for, and a baby, and a future. But I just had me, so I kept it. And now it's just like, people need this place, you know? So, here we are, and I've dragged you into it with me because, I don't know, maybe I'm a pussy, or maybe I was lonely, or maybe I'm just a bad fucking person. But you don't leave. None of you ever leaves, even when it gets bad. And I think maybe that's because I do an okay job of keeping you safe, so I'll keep at it as long as you will. And when we've all decided we can't take it anymore, then we'll reevaluate, I guess. Matt was beginning to slur a little now, and he took one last long drink before sliding his glass down the counter. We still talk from time to time. Jung pretends it's just to catch up, but he's really checking in, keeping tabs, making sure I haven't died. I ask him how the family is. He asks how work's going. I tell him everything's fine, and that's just understood code for I'm alive. We're all still alive. Feels like it ought to count for something. It does. Wiley's voice was slightly strained, and they cleared their throat, clapping a hand gently on Matt's shoulder. It counts for a lot, and hey, if we didn't want to be here, we wouldn't. Okay? None of us, right, Adam? Yeah, I agreed. Yeah, that's right. Hate to break it to you, but I think you're pretty well stuck with all of us at this point. The corner of Matt's lips tilted up. He blew a breath of laughter out his nose. Well, that's good to hear, he said, because one of these days the scorekeeper's coming for me. And when it does, when it's time to make my deal, it better be worth it. It better be for one of you. Hello again, everyone. I apologize at the beginning of the last post for taking so long to update, and then took incrementally longer this time, so I'm sorrier now. There's been a lot, capital A, capital lot, going on lately, and while I will get to that at some point in the near future, It isn't what today's story is going to focus on. When I said before that we'll take anything anyone's willing to donate to our abysmally slim excuse for a collection, I meant anything. Somebody brought in a totally customized, like personalized to them, it made no sense to us, Cards Against Humanity deck recently, and it started up a conversation about some of the most off-the-wall donations we've ever received, which reminded me of something that happened a while ago that I feel like is definitely worthy of a post. It was a Thursday night. The entire crew was working, which is rare, but happens every once in a while when we've been busy enough that we've all got something to do. I watched from my office as somebody struggled to open the front door, Jenny rushing out from behind the desk to help a second before the effort would have been wasted. She used her foot as a doorstop and ushered in a man who was precariously balancing a tall stack of large cardboard boxes in his arms. "Can just set them down right here on the desk," I heard Jenny telling him as they drew nearer. "We sure appreciate it." The man eased the boxes down, straightening them to ensure that they wouldn't fall, and literally tipped his literal hat before turning to leave. "Donations?" I asked, poking my head around the corner. "Yep," Jenny confirmed, popping her gum. "Want to help me take them to Alice?" I obliged, hoisting a couple of the boxes off the counter and following Jenny's lead back toward the unmistakable sound of Alice's nails clicking against her keyboard. "Presents," Jenny announced, dropping her boxes with a thunk and leaning back against the wall, arms crossed over her chest. "Can we get a live unpackaging?" "Thank you," Alice said, accepting my boxes and placing them to her other side. Then to Jenny, "Sure, but it'll probably be boring. They're heavy. Bet they're textbooks or something." This is the part in the movie where the narrator cuts in and is like, "They were not, in fact, textbooks." I wish a real-time narrator could have cut in right then and told us that. But apparently that's not how life works. So, we opened them. The first one, in all fairness, was unassuming. It was full of books on astrology, dreams, tarot reading, etc., etc. Very New Age mysticism, which is popular enough that even with a collection as limited as ours, we have a small section for it. After that, though, shit got weird. The next box also contained books, but they had no jackets and no titles, just identical leather binding. "What the hell?" Jenny said, leaning over Alice to pick one up. When she flipped it open, we were met with a cover page filled with someone's messy ink scrawl. At first, I thought I couldn't decipher it just because the handwriting was such a wreck. But I quickly realized that while they might resemble familiar letters, the markings on the page didn't belong anywhere in the English alphabet. I scanned the entire page, eyes looking to zero in on something they could make sense of. And just when I was about to call it quits, I landed on the very last line. "By my mind and by my spirit," I read aloud. "The fuck is this?" Jenny snatched another book from the box and flipped back the cover to reveal a remarkably similar display to that of the one I held. Not identical. The penmanship didn't match perfectly, and a slightly smaller expanse of the page was taken up, but it was covered in the same symbols and ended in the same sign-off. "How many of them are there?" Alice sifted through them, and then after a moment reported, 7, including those 2. Upon closer inspection, we discovered that, while several of the tomes had what looked to be a few pages torn out in the front, they were mostly undisturbed. There was no writing or marking of any kind past the flyleaf. Reluctantly, given that there wasn't much else to explore without the ability to understand the glyphs, we set that box aside and moved on to the next. At first glance, it looked to be filled with swaths of fabric, but I realized when I made to pick one up that the fabric simply acted as a wrapping for various other objects. For example, once the red silk fell away, in my hand lay a muslin bag bearing a twine tie and a tag that read osteomancy. When I turned it over, something rattled inside. "Open it," Jenny urged. Something deep in the pit of my stomach told me I shouldn't, but Mama didn't raise no bitch, or whatever it is the kids are saying these days, so I did. And then, because I am in fact a little bitch, I dropped it, which prompted the bones that had shocked me into letting it go to roll out and scatter over the desk. "Shit," Alice remarked, startled. "What the fuck is that?" "Rabbit," Jenny guessed confidently, and then defended. "What? My dad hunted," when Alice glanced questioningly up at her. "Do we even want to know what else is in here?" I asked. swiftly gathering the bones and slipping them back into their sachet. Alice was already elbow deep in the box. She withdrew a parcel covered in black tulle and unraveled it to reveal a small wooden chest with a gold embossed label. Tasseomancy. Cautiously unhooking the latch, she swung the lid open to reveal a teacup? Seriously, I get a dead animal and all you pull out is a teacup? With tea, Alice corrected, lifting a single-use tin of loose-leaf tea from inside the cup. And it was hardly a dead animal. Stop being dramatic. You're not even a vegetarian. I didn't technically have a counter, so I shut up. Alice placed the tea next to the bag of bones, and Jenny drew the next item from the box. This one, it was clear, was a set of playing cards. Only instead of a brand or picture on the packaging, there was a single printed word, cartomancy. When we pulled them out, we found that the cards themselves were entirely ordinary. I'm not sure what I expected, but there was nothing unusual about the suits or the colors or the imagery at all. Boring, Jenny said, frowning. Next? As it turned out, there was only one more thing to retrieve, which was surprising considering the amount of space it took up. It was a large silver case with scrying etched across the lid in calligraphic scroll, and when I opened it up, there were several separate parcels wrapped in linen and cotton and lace. The first was labeled Captromancy and contained a heavy iron hand mirror, except the glass wasn't reflective, it was solid black. The next was Hydromancy, and inside was a black ceramic bowl along with a small glass jar of water, which some purple stones had settled to the bottom of. Then Pyromancy, 2 taper candles, 1 black, 1 white, with brass stands. Then Chiromancy, Encromancy, sealing wax and a pot of ink. And finally, Spheromancy. Yes, as in a sphere. As in a crystal ball. Except it didn't look like the ones in the movies. Rather than being crystal, get it? Clear, it was filled with cloudy, almost milky inclusions. Jenny whistled. Holy balls! That is a chunk of quartz. This garnered inquisitive brow raises from both Alice and myself, to which Jenny's response was, my dad was into rock hounding too. Get off my ass. Only one left, Alice observed, nodding to the lone remaining untouched box. Any guesses? Jenny snorted. What if it's just like something totally normal? Like, oh, here's all this occult shit and also some cookbooks? We all knew it wouldn't be cookbooks. Alice opened the box. At first, I thought I was looking at a cutting board. It was just a giant slab of wood, so large it barely fit flush with the bottom of the box. But then I noticed something else in the corner. Alice did too, apparently, because she picked it up. No way, she said, turning it over in her hand. This is one of those things, isn't it? The pointer piece or whatever for a Ouija board? Whoa! Jenny snatched it from her, tapping her nails against the small, round window embedded in the wooden triangle. Fancy? I expected plastic. So wait, is that the board? I asked, nodding toward the box. Or is the board in that? Alice reached in again, heaving the slab out and onto the desk before her. Sure enough, the face of a Ouija board stared back at us. Yes and no had been burned elegantly into the top corners. 2 rows of letters arched through the center, and a line of numbers hovered over the goodbye across the bottom. The only atypical aspect was that, rather than the typical Ouija branding front and center, the board's heading read, Lift the Veil. I mean, Alice laughed, we have to, right? Oh, def, Jenny agreed. You in? I'm in, I conceded, because I'm a fucking idiot. I almost said in my defense, but no, there's really no defense for me. I should have known better, did know better, than to think anything that had a 0.01% chance of going wrong wouldn't in this place. Even something as laughable as playing with a Ouija board. We took it into the break room and set up at the table. Alice and I across from one another, Jenny between us. Should we turn some of the lights off or something? Jenny wondered aloud. It doesn't feel spooky enough. I got it, I volunteered, crossing the floor to the panel of light switches next to the sink and flipping 2 of them off, leaving only the central tile illuminating the room. Much better, Alice affirmed as I sat back down. Okay, so what do we do? Just all touch the thing, right? Planchette, Jenny supplied. My dad dated a medium. Of course he did, Alice deadpanned. Is that what we do then? Place 2 fingers on it, Jenny instructed. Like this. The planchette was positioned in the center of the board, and Jenny lifted her right hand, resting the tips of her middle and pointer fingers against one of its edges. Don't put any pressure on it. Do it like you're, I don't know, petting a baby animal or something. Alice and I swiftly followed her lead, my fingertips resting at the point, Alice's on the heart-shaped top. Now what? I asked. Now we just ask it questions, Jenny said, shrugging. But not stupid questions. We have to ask, like, if there's anybody here that wants to communicate or whatever. Okay. Alice took a breath and closed her eyes. I could tell she was trying to make herself take it seriously. Is there anyone here who would like to speak with us? To none of our disbelief, nothing happened. We waited several moments just to be sure, and then I tried. If anybody has something to say, you're welcome to use this board to say it. I counted the rhythmic beats of my heart in the silence. 1 beat, 2 beats, 10, nothing. We're trying to give you a platform here, Jenny reasoned. It's kind of disrespectful if you don't use it. When the planchette twitched, my breath caught, but Alice quickly debunked any suspicions. Sorry, that was me. My hand was itching. Jenny rolled her eyes. Christ's sake, this is so lame. We know you're here. Why don't you just fucking... And I didn't even have a chance to process what was happening before Jenny's nose was pouring blood. A second later, I realized the wood under my hand was now that of the board. The planchette was gone, having flown out from beneath our fingers to smack Jenny square in the center of the face. Oh my God, she stuttered. When she pulled her hand away from the offended area, crimson began flooding over her bright, grinning teeth. Bitchin'! I did not feel as though this development was bitchin'. In fact, I was fairly sure it leaned considerably further toward not good at all. I objected eloquently. Okay, I think that's enough, Alice remarked, rolling herself to the counter and grabbing a wad of paper towels to toss in Jenny's general direction. We were looking for spooky, not violent. Let's say fuck this board and the horse it rode in on and trash the whole thing, yeah? The door slammed shut. Because of fucking course it did. I don't think I need to reveal that it wouldn't open. I did try, but I knew before I'd even touched the handle that it wasn't going to happen. What would the point have been in closing us in if we could just leave? Ding, ding, ding. That's right. Nothing. Oh, come on, Alice groaned. I said we were done. We're sorry, okay? We fucked around and found out, and we won't do it again. Just let us out, and nobody ever lays a finger on this board again, I swear. Whatever had shut the door, it did not let us out. You know how in horror movies, every time there's a telekinetic, people end up pinned to the walls by furniture? Just picture that. That's what happened. It was so quick, too. That part sort of fascinated me in a strange, detached way. 1 second I was trying my damnedest to pry the door open, and the next I was stuck between the dishwasher and a mobile coffee cart that, hand to the Bible, only weighs 50 pounds, but somehow had me absolutely cemented in place. Shit! I heard Jenny exclaim, and looked up from my own predicament to find that she was trapped in the corner by nothing but a floor lamp, blood still gushing from her nose. It took a little more work to box Alice in her wheelchair in, so naturally the entire table had been flipped on its side and the legs surrounded her, each of their stoppers secured to the wall behind her. On the center of the floor, the planchette lay atop the board. Slowly it began to move. Adam, what's it spelling? Alice cried, because I was closest. The lighting made it difficult to make out the letters etched into the board's surface, but not impossible. Squinting, I read aloud, okay, no sacrifice. Nobody sacrificing anything. The board didn't seem to care to hear my protests. It finished spelling the word and then circled down to the number 1, and then blood unwilling done. I was about to get confused enough to ask what in the fresh hell that was supposed to mean, but then it started up again. This time the sequence was 1, flesh, willing, choose. A sick, terrible realization washed over me. 1 unwilling blood sacrifice. I said. Done. Jenny, that was you. Now it needs a willing flesh sacrifice, and it wants us to choose who it comes from. I turned back to the board. Is that right? Yes. All right, wait. What constitutes as flesh? Alice asked. Like, could we bite off a hangnail? No. So, live flesh only? Yes. We should probably be screaming for help, Jenny reasoned. I mean, right? I don't know about y'all, but I'd really rather not sacrifice any of my live flesh. A sicker, more terrible realization washed over me. Alice, I said even, measured. If we call for help, this thing might let somebody else into the room and trap them too. We don't want anyone else to get hurt. And we don't want to get hurt either, of course. But hurt is such a dynamic term because technically if you're harmed, you're asterisk hurt. Asterisk, sure. I'll give you that. But if something doesn't hurt you, you bastard, Alice accused, because she was smart enough to know precisely what direction I was steering the conversation in. I am not fucking cutting off one of my toes just because I can't feel them. What? No, I didn't. But I stopped while I was ahead because I had, and we all knew it. I'm sorry, I sighed. You're right, that's incredibly fucked up. I'm just kind of freaking out, and I don't know what to do, and my brain's trying to improvise. Alice glared at me for a solid 5 seconds, and then snorted, shaking her head. You should have seen your stupid face. Why wouldn't I do it? I can't feel it. Then to the board. That still counts, right? You said flesh, not pain. A pause. Then, I guess. Does it have to be a toe? Or can I just, cut a chunk of skin out? You said flesh, I reminded the board a second time. Not bone. My game, the board shot back my rules. Alice took a breath and nodded her head resigned. Fine. Can I get a knife? The drawer next to me whipped open so fiercely that it bashed against my elbow, prompting me to cry out. Slowly, as though it was floating, a small, dull paring knife rose into the air. Oh, you are a sick son of a bitch. Can I not at least have something more likely to cut steak than an old woman's gums? The drawer slammed shut. Guess not. The knife floated across the room to Alice at a snail's pace, and I could feel the anxiety mounting in my chest with every inch. Were Jenny and I really just going to watch her mutilate herself? We couldn't, could we? But what other choice did we have? Who knew what this thing was capable of? To the best of our knowledge, it could have been letting us off easy. If we drew attention to ourselves, the entity could use us as bait to lure in every single person in the building. It could pick us off one by one. It could. There was a knock. We all froze. So did the knife. Hello? Horace called from outside the door. Is there a reason I'm locked out? There's an evil Ouija board trapping us inside, and it said Alice has to cut off her toe or it won't let us out. Incredulously, I looked to Jenny. What? She snapped, exasperated. It didn't let him in, so clearly your theory's bullshit. We need help. Horace, we need help. The fucking door fucking opened. Horace stepped inside, eyes wide and wild. The fucking door fucking slammed shut. Fuck, I hissed. I knew this shit was going to happen. I knew it. Horace held up a finger to silence me, taking a moment to look around the room and fully assess the situation. Then he sat down on the floor, large legs pretzeled into a crisscross fashion, and placed his fingertips on the planchette. In a confident, practiced fashion, he began reciting something. I only heard it the one time, and I don't speak Latin, so I couldn't recount it here if I tried. But it was a chant. That much was clear. It consisted of 5 or so lines repeated in succession, and once he'd made it fully through 3 rounds, it was as though all the power drained from the magnetic force holding us all in place. It happened so abruptly that when the coffee cart rolled away from me on the natural slight slope of the floor, I fell straight forward, catching myself with my hands just in time to save my face from smashing into the tile. Jenny crashed to the ground and took the lamp that had been holding her hostage down with her, and the table blocking Alice in toppled onto its back, freeing her from the wall. I blinked. What? Jenny demanded. The fuck was that? Horace slid the planchette to goodbye and stood, dusting himself off. Don't mess with things you don't understand, was all he said. Then he crossed the room to the refrigerator, extracted a bottle of water, and left. Needless to say, since we had, as Alice put it, fucked around and subsequently found out, our endeavors with the board were over. We gave Matt the whole rundown and he berated us for being fucking stupid, rightfully so, and then told Jenny that her broken nose would not be covered under workers' comp because it was her own damn fault. The board is still in the building, as are the other various occult items we received along with it, because we weren't sure how to properly dispose of any of it. We did try to ask Horace, since he clearly possessed some background knowledge that the rest of us did not, but he denied having any idea what we were talking about, which is fairly characteristic of him when he absolutely is not going to address something. So, we're SOL on that front. We've never seen the man that brought it all in again. I'll admit, I am frequently tempted to try to decipher the writing in the journals, at the very least. There's something about them that keeps me up at night once in a while, just turning that solitary line of English over and over in my brain, by my mind and by my spirit. But I truthfully have no idea where to start, and even if I did, well, I've learned enough in my time here to understand that more often than not, it's better to let dead things lie. I said when I told you about how I went upstairs that I did it again. One more time. That's where we're going to start. And then we'll talk about the aftermath. Every great once in a while, something fucks up so badly around here that not even Wiley can fix it. This time, of course, it was the HVAC system. Now, I don't think I need to tell you how incredibly careful we have to be letting people into certain areas of the building, and obviously upstairs is usually off limits. But it was unseasonably warm throughout the entirety of fall, and that meant that when our AC went out, it got hotter in the library than it did outside. I was coming in as Della was heading out. She works during the day a lot. I assume it's so no one will try to talk to her. And I watched her mop the sweat off her forehead with a cleaning cloth as she made her way toward the door. As soon as I set foot inside, I understood why. Holy shit, I muttered, already stripping out of my overshirt as I approached Matt at the desk. Why is it a sauna in here? I wanted a spa day, he quipped dryly. He was sweating too, dark hair matted to his forehead. I've been upstairs with Wiley already. They couldn't figure out what the problem was, but the coast seems to be clear up there for now. So, we called in the big guns. They'll be here soon. I swallowed but didn't voice my concerns. Matt knew better than I did how risky it was. Okay, I agreed instead. Let me know if you need anything when they get here. Matt nodded, offering me a two-fingered salute, and I headed into the back to get to work. It took around half an hour for someone to show up, and when they did, Matt knocked on the wall between my desk and circulation, beckoning me out. Can you hang up here till we're done? He asked. I'm going to follow him, in case he needs to know where something is, or, whatever. Ha! Yeah, whatever. Sure, I said, forcing a smile. We appreciate you coming out. The maintenance guy was youngish, somewhere in the ballpark of my age, I assumed, and when he grinned back at me, deep, boyish dimples appeared on either side of his mouth. Happy to help, he breezed, and if I can't get it sorted out, I'll call my dad. He pointed to the patch on his jacket, which read Murphy's. He's the boss, man. Never seen a job he couldn't tackle. Now, what do you say we get y'all cooled off? I say hell yeah, I chuckled, adamantly ignoring the ever-deepening pit in my stomach and knowing full well that Matt was doing the same. He's already checked it out, I reminded myself. There's nothing up there. Everything's fine. Hell yeah, the guy echoed enthusiastically. If I break something and the building catches on fire, just holler so I can come put it out. Name's Sam. Adam, I responded, reaching across the desk to shake his hand. If I see flames, you'll be the first to know. They took off. For a long while, there was nothing. I checked out a handful of patrons, flipped through a few cookbooks. Not for any real reason. I'm a millennial. I have no concept of how to feed myself anything that hasn't been warmed to perfection under a heat lamp, and finally resorted to bringing some books that had been written in out from my hoard to clean them, which, fun fact, actually just consists of extremely carefully sanding the pages and praying you don't tear holes through them. I was 9 novels into my pile when I heard it. A loud mechanical screeching. I held my breath. Wiley appeared from between the stacks, eyes wide. The hell? They said. I shook my head. I watched their breath catch too as we listened. There was a quiet rattling that had started just after the screech and hadn't quite stopped, and the longer it went on, the more my brain felt like it was vibrating. "It's nothing," I said. I didn't believe it, and Wiley didn't either, so I repeated myself in hopes that it would stick. "It's nothing. They're just moving stuff around up there, and it's scraping the floor, that's all." "Yeah," Wiley agreed hollowly. "That's all. That was, say it with me, not all." We did spend a decent stretch of time trying to pretend that it was, but eventually the rattling grew louder, and the screeching started back up. And then, you guessed it, screaming. I was halfway up the stairs before I even knew what had hit me, hollering behind me for Wiley to go and lock the doors so no one could come inside while God knew what was going down. I must have been running, footsteps echoing loudly enough on each step that Matt heard them, because when I'd nearly reached the top, he yelled, "God damn it, Adam, do not come up here." I wasn't going to pay a single fuck of attention to that, obviously, so I pushed myself harder, nearly tripping from the momentum when I reached the landing at the top. What I saw was, well, make sure you've read this installment before you continue if you haven't already, or none of the following will make any sense. I'll give you a moment to check. Back with me? Okay. Now, have you ever heard the horse-sized spider versus spider-sized horses dilemma? If you haven't, let me explain. It's exactly what it sounds like. In your opinion, what's worse? One horse-sized spider or 1,000 spider-sized horses? Both options with the intent to harm you for the case of the scenario? There certainly weren't 1,000 miniature winged mechanical monstrosities before me, nor 100, nor 50, nor even 10. But the solid 5 flailing about with their sticky, dripping wings were enough to both metaphorically and literally bring me to my knees. They were identical to the thing I'd encountered upstairs before in most every way, except much smaller. Smaller than me even, only about half my size, and there was a fine coating of fuzz on their bat-like wings, almost like a gosling's down feathers. They were circling around in a frenzy, paying me no attention whatsoever. And as soon as my initial shock wore off, I saw why. They were entirely occupied by other targets. One of them had wrapped itself around Sam, who didn't look to be fighting back in any capacity, and another 2 had pinned Matt's legs and torso to the ground, leaving him to fruitlessly attempt to beat them off with his fists. The rest were watching closely, awaiting their moment to strike. "Adam," Matt yelled again, warning. "I mean it." I stood and stepped forward, fully into the room. Something dripped onto my head. I touched it because what the fuck else was I supposed to do? And my fingers came away viscous but still finger-colored. I felt my heart seizing up in my chest, the fear that it might be saliva chilling me to my core. But it dawned on me nearly as quickly as the thought came that if that were the case, I would smell it. I shuddered at the memory of the creature's foul, putrid breath and gathered my courage, tilting my head upward. The best way I know to describe the amalgamation of small wires and scraps of metal above me is a nest, which I guess makes sense if you don't think about it literally at all. Things with wings equal sign things with nests most of the time, right? Anyway, I didn't have long to ponder the logistics because another glob of the clear substance leaked from a small gap in the structure and, had my reflexes not kicked in at precisely that moment, would have hit me square in the eye. I bent down to examine it, much easier to study now that it was in front of me rather than on me, and realized upon prodding that it behaved like a mixture of egg white and some type of oil. "Matt," I said, a sinking feeling rooting its way into my stomach. I think maybe something's hatching." "I'm only going to say this to you one more time," Matt threatened, struggle present in his tone. "Get the fuck out." I hadn't bothered to respond to his demands thus far, knowing full well that all arguing would accomplish was wasting both our time. But I finally offered, "I'm not leaving you. I'm sorry. I'm not." When I looked back over to him to meet his eyes, it was the closest to desperation I'd ever seen him. His expression, his body language, even beneath the monster restraining him, everything screamed that he was silently pleading with me to leave. "Something is wrong, Adam," he managed, voice tight. "More wrong than just this." I wasn't sure at first. I thought maybe the time had just gotten away from me, but the clock. Are you wearing a watch? I wasn't. The sinking feeling sunk more heavily. I followed Matt's anxious gaze to the far wall, where the large digital clock mounted above one of the HVAC monitors read 3:30. The sinking feeling made its way into my feet. I came in at 7, I said dumbly. The fucking lights went out. Have you ever been inside a cave? The kind of darkness so all-encompassing you can't see your hand in front of your face? That was this. Instant, complete black. I heard a groan, one that didn't belong to Matt, and felt a small wave of relief wash over me at the confirmation that Sam must still be alive. I didn't have any idea how to get to him, however, or any way to gauge where the winged monstrosities were in relation to myself. All right. This was Matt, as calm and measured as I'd ever heard him. Okay. Adam? Yeah, right here. Can you walk toward me if I keep talking? I think so, I said, taking a tentative step forward and to my left. Are they still? But as soon as I asked, I became acutely aware of it. The silence. There was no flapping, no shuffling, no metallic screeching. Nothing. Just keep walking, Matt told me. I wasn't sure if I liked the evenness to his tone. It sounded almost trained. I kept walking. Sam groaned again, but didn't form any intelligible words, so I didn't bother trying to call out to him. Instead, I asked Matt, "Am I close?" "Keep coming," he said from just ahead of me. "You're close." A handful of steps further, and I startled, scarcely stifling a scream as I felt cold fingers wrap around my ankle. But Matt offered a quick assurance of, "It's okay. It's me." And I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. What he followed with, however, I'd never heard him say before, and it turned my blood to ice. "I need help." I swallowed, grateful for 1 millisecond that the darkness was thick enough to mask my fear. "With what?" I asked, praying I sounded steadier than I felt. "These things are on top of me. They just went limp when the lights went out, and they're too heavy for me to move on my own." "Oh," I said, "God. Okay. You made it sound like something worse. Don't do that shit." I lowered myself onto my knees, feeling around in front of me, until I had a solid grasp on what I was fairly sure must be the neck of one of the beasts, and counted aloud to 3 so that Matt would know when to push as I pulled. Together we dislodged it, casting its motionless form with a ringing thud into the concrete floor. "One down. Is the other one?" "On my legs," Matt said, mostly. "Mostly?" For a second, nothing. Then a heavy, defeated sigh as Matt lifted my hand, guiding it up and over his abdomen to finally land on a patch of warm, slick flesh. Not sticky, not like the residue all over him from the monster's wings. This was different. This was Matt. There was no verbal response, but he pressed downward, guiding my fingers to wrap around something long and cylindrical and metallic. "Matt, there's a spike at the end of the tail," he explained, as though he was casually discussing his day. "It's not barbed or anything, so it's fine, but it's too wet for me to pull it out of. I can't get a grip on it." I closed my eyes, my vision unchanging, and prepared myself. "Okay," I said. I'd left my button down on the back of the chair at the circulation desk, so I tugged my t-shirt over my head and wound it around the thing's tail, forcing myself not to consider how quickly it was soaking through with blood. "Ready?" "Ready," Matt echoed. As swiftly as I could, so as not to draw out the pain any longer than I had to, I yanked the tail upward and out of Matt's side, casting it to the ground and utilizing the remainder of the adrenaline burst to shove the rest of the body off his thighs. He didn't make a peep, but his breathing fell into a shallow, unsteady cadence. "Okay?" I asked, even though no, obviously he wasn't. But he would be. Had to be. For a moment, I allowed myself to consider the very real possibility that this was what would finally do him in, that he would bleed out at my hands, and that there would be nothing I could do to stop it. But then he rasped, "Golden," and I felt my heart start pumping again. "Good," I breathed, balling up my shirt and pressing it into his palm. "Here, can you put pressure on it?" "Yeah, I got it. Try to get to the kid." See if you can wake him up. I forced myself back to my feet, stumbling blindly around in an attempt to orient myself, and then, right on cue, Sam made another quiet, pain sound. I started toward it, shuffling my feet so that if I made it to him, I wouldn't find out by stepping on his fingers and crushing them. It was a process, a long one, that consisted of shuffling and stopping to listen, and shuffling some more, and Matt asking if I'd made it yet and telling him no, but finally the toe of my shoe came into contact with something. I bent down, reluctantly reaching out to brush my fingertips over whatever I'd collided with, and immediately relaxed upon registering the sensation of touching very human hair. "Hey," I tried, feeling around to find his shoulder and gently shaking it. "Sam?" I was met with a whine, but no real acknowledgement. "Sam," I said again a little louder, shaking him a little harder. "Come on, wake up!" This time I heard his breath hitch, but I had no idea if it was in response to me or to the pain he was inevitably in. Either way, he still didn't say anything. "I've got him," I called back to Matt, "but he's not white." Not just white, but the opposite of black. The white at the center of a flame. The white you can't blink away after glancing at the sun, no matter how hard you try. The entire room was awash in it, just as blinding as the darkness, every bit as suffocating. Then, just as quickly as it had come, it was gone. The dim yellow strip lights flickered overhead. I hadn't even noticed that the constant humming of the HVAC machines had stopped until it started back up again, green and red indicators blinking on in tandem. I was still crouched next to Sam, and I dared to glance at him, terrified of what I would find. He was completely still and completely unscathed. I whipped around seeking out Matt and found that he was already up and moving, about halfway across the floor to us. There wasn't a drop of blood on him. He tossed my perfectly gray, perfectly dry shirt to me, and I caught it rigidly, nearly too stunned to put it back on. "What?" was all I could manage. Matt shook his head. "I don't know." The creatures had vanished. I glanced back to Sam for a moment, and after determining that he was definitely breathing, crossed the floor to the entryway, casting my gaze upward toward the nest. It was still there, and the thin, gelatinous substance was still pooling underneath, readying itself for another drip. I couldn't tell if the creatures were inside or not. There didn't seem to be any active movement, and no sound escaped it. But I assumed they must be. There wasn't anywhere else for them to have gone. For a fleeting moment, I wanted to ask Matt if he had his lighter. I wanted to take the ladder down from the far wall and climb to the top and set the monsters ablaze while they lay dormant. But I didn't. To be perfectly honest, I don't know why. Maybe because I couldn't begin to guess what wrath killing them would incur. Or maybe, well, I've always been a bit of a big, mean, scary animal apologist. They're just trying to survive, you know? Just like the rest of us. Obviously, I'm not going to lay down and die, but if something isn't actively harming me or anyone in my general vicinity, I can't imagine that wiping it out wouldn't feel a little like cold-blooded murder. And besides, not that I have solid proof, but if I'm going purely off intuition, I truly believe whatever was oozing out of the nest was these creatures' equivalent to some kind of disgusting amniotic fluid. Sort of feels like Matt shot their mom, and now the rest of them are just trying to protect their new baby sibling. Also, I really had no way to gauge how well it would have gone. They could have bitten my head off as soon as I was face to face with them, so I figured it was probably best to let sleeping dogs, or robot dinosaur bats, lie. What I couldn't let lie, however, was Sam. Apparently, Matt had the same thought, because when I turned back around, he was hauling him up by his armpits, still fully unconscious. "Here," I said, rushing over to them. "Let me help." Matt maneuvered Sam around so that I could pull his left arm around my shoulders, his right draped over Matt's, and together we wrangled him down the stairs, slamming the door to the mechanical room securely behind us. Right on the other side, Wiley was waiting, eyes flitting wildly from Matt to me to Sam. "What the fuck happened?" they demanded. I wasn't sure if they meant with the creatures or the time jump or what, so I was grateful when Matt responded, "A lot. Is he? He's alive." I was secure enough in that at least to confirm it as fact. Just knock the fuck out. Come on, Matt said. Let's get him settled down somewhere. We took him out to the children's area and plopped him onto a beanbag chair, figuring it was the safest bet, considering we didn't trust him to stay upright. It took a lot of light face slapping and some cold water over the head. But finally, Sam's eyes shot open. Hey! I took a step back, afraid I'd startle him if I was standing too close. Freaked us out for a minute there. Are you all right? Sam blinked. Who are you? I'm Adam, I reminded him, my stomach begging to instantly fill back up with dread. You're at the library. You came to fix our AC, remember? Slowly, Sam's head turned side to side. I looked over to Matt. It's okay, he assured me. Probably just a concussion. Why don't you go give his dad a call? Let him know what's going on. I think I've got him from here. Yeah, I assented, glad to be given an out. Okay. Pulling my cell from my pocket as I walked away, I did a quick Google search for Murphy's Heating and Air, double-checking that the first result was in the correct area before I hit call below the business's hours, praying it was a personal cell that would still be reachable so late. After the third ring, a gruff voice answered, Murphy's. I waited for a "how can I help you?" or maybe some kind of awful business slogan, but none came. Hi, I started shake-a-willy. Is this, Mr. Murphy? A moment of silence, during which time I punched myself in the metaphorical fucking face because, God, could I not even have bothered to click the Facebook link at the top of the page to try to find his first name? And then, I own the joint, if that's what you mean. Yes, I said, okay, yeah. I just wanted to. I'm Adam Ward. I work at the library your son came to service this evening. I'm sure you're worried sick about him. I know he should have been back a long time ago, but I just wanted to let you know that he's... Billy didn't take a call this evening. My internal dialogue defaulted to the dial-up sound. Oh, sorry. Not Billy, Sam. Another pause then. I ain't got but the one son, boy. Is this some kind of prank? The dial-up sound grew louder. Just to be sure, I asked if he could confirm the location of his business. He did, in quite an irritated manner. And there's not another Murphy's in the area that you know of? You got too damn much time on your hands, kid, he said and hung up. I headed back to the children's area to inform Matt that we had a problem. When I reached him, he said, we have a problem. I know, I told him. Then when my brain caught up, wait, another one? Jesus H., what's your problem? I stepped closer to Matt, lowering my voice. Sam's dad doesn't know who he is. Matt laughed once. There was no humor in it. Oh, good. I was thinking amnesia, 'cause my problem was that Sam doesn't know who he is. But I'm glad to hear it's a whole hell of a lot fucking worse. We did, of course, call an ambulance. And they did, of course, take Sam to the hospital. We told them everything we could. The name he'd given us, why he was at the library in the first place, and that he'd hit his head and couldn't recall anything, himself included. I'm not sure what their findings were, as they weren't allowed to disclose any patient information to anyone who wasn't family, which Sam didn't seem to have. What I do know, however, is that when he was released, he gave the cab driver the library's address. We waited days, weeks, hoping that we'd somehow contacted the wrong person, that news articles or missing posters would start cropping up, that we'd get a call asking about him from his dad's real company. Nothing. So that's it. He's one of us now. He's happy enough. Seems to be anyway. Does whatever he can find that's not finished. Shelves when Horace is out. Cleans when Della's off. Works Cirque when there's a gap in the schedule. Great customer service. Personable. Friendly. Plus, Wiley's got a roommate now. There wasn't anywhere else for him to go. So, I mean, I don't feel like I need to explain Matt's take on strays, especially when he feels like he's responsible. Like it's his fault. So I just keep reminding myself that it could have turned out worse. He could have died. We all could have, and he's adjusting just fine. No signs whatsoever that he's starting to remember his old life or starting to miss it. There's just one thing. Every once in a while, when he isn't actively working or talking or otherwise engaged, Sam will wander off. Every time I've found him, inside the mechanical room, just at the bottom of the stairs. Thank you for watching the video fully. Please hit the like and subscribe button, since I could not make these videos without your support, and it means the world to me.